Hey humans, I'm Aaron Rosenmund, and I'm here to talk to you today about threat emulation and the way that malware is created, particularly Ironcat Malware, which is the moniker I go by as well. Ironcat ransomware was developed to emulate real ransomware. It did it really well, and it was supposed to do it inside of a contained environment, but it leaked out. And this happened about 4-ish years ago, right? And when it leaked out, this is what we saw. We saw it spread out across the world. Everybody thought it was another threat actor like Soden Cohibi or Revil, and they thought that this threat actor had decided to start using Golang, because that's what I had written it in. That was mainly from the letter that was written and the Tor address that was used. So something to keep in mind in general for just threat attribution, like how easy is that for me to just replicate a letter, just copy pasted from the internet, and now everyone thinks that it's actually this specific threat actor. So that's just a little bit dangerous, something to be aware and be careful of. Now, the result of this was that we got a Ironcat ransomware family of signatures for Microsoft, which I think is pretty awesome. We're on Malpedia as well. And then I got to see some other interesting stuff. There's all these companies that come out and say, we can remove this particular ransomware if you have it. We can remove it if it's infected your computer. The best part about all of it is everything that they said was completely wrong. And I know it because I'm the one who wrote the ransomware. So I thought that that was pretty interesting in general. So something to be aware of. These are all just kind of scams. Make sure that you avoid those in general. They're not going to be able to do anything for you. Everything they said to do can't actually do anything about the malware that I wrote. Now, I did release the malware in a safe way at Blue Team Con in 2022 in Chicago. It was awesome. And you can use this to emulate it in the same way that I do and do it for professionally and for other companies. We're going to emulate this. And the reason that you do this is to test your technology, people, and processes, right? You're going to test your defenses. Do my technical defenses detect this? Do they stop it? And the different things and behaviors that malware actors actually use. Can my people detect it and or respond to it after the fact and identify all the things that it did on the system, right? And does my process for responding to this, maybe even at scale on a couple different devices or just something to kind of practice responding to ransomware in general, does that work, right? And this gave me a way to kind of produce this over time. Now we started with VirusTotal. I can show you, I started with the original version way back here, and this is what we saw. So this was originally uploaded, 53 detections or 53 engines detected it as malicious. Now, originally it was like nearly 0. And the community has quite a bit of response. There's Yara signatures that have been developed that have since been evaded. And there's some information from me, and then a couple different groups that have responded in here trying to be helpful. Now, what is really interesting in this, and this is what really piqued my interest and kind of sparked me to go on and do different talks about how you can evade this kind of antivirus detection, is that I now own this code base. I have a malware family that's being kind of tracked and detected as it changes. But if I simply change just a very small amount of this code, like the very version before this that I ran is this one, and now it's only 17 engines detected. And there's maybe a few lines of code that changed, and it was just to make it slightly more functional. This is before I had a functional version. And it's detected as a different actor. So like for Microsoft, it's no longer the Ironcat actor. So it's just something interesting. What about those small changes made that happen? And if we go look for, say, the public version that I released, we see what it does. Now remember, it's been released publicly, so it has more detections. It's been public for like 9 months, so we expect it to have some detections on here. One community response with from 826, which is great, with a Thor APT scanner, but still not as much response as we had seen in the past, right? And only 17 detections. So something interesting to keep in mind. Now, let me show you what this kind of plays out as on an actual Windows device. I want to test this on an actual Windows device and also kind of go over like why this matters so much and what I'm going to be doing in the rest of the clips from the series, the rest of the videos that come out with for the series. Now, the first thing I want to do is go back, just like we did with VirusTotal. Let's go back and test out the first one. and see how Windows responds to it. However, let me show you for fidelity here. Let's open up PowerShell. You can use git np computer status, and we can check and see that the last time this was scanned was actually 1.2. It is active, but the really important part is that the last time that it was updated was 3/28/21. Now, I get it. That's super old now. That's on purpose. I want you to see how this does and doesn't run before we install an antivirus that catches all the way up to the public one I released. Now, why am I not worried about that? Well, the public one I released is still the same version from 4 years ago. So there's plenty of other versions I've developed that we'll be able to continue with from there. That'll be the kind of the new baseline as we progress. So first, take a look at how Defender responds appropriately when we drop in the old version, the one that was originally detected and has signatures. Sure enough, it identifies it. And if we take a look and see how, it's the Ironcat malware, just like we expected. So it's kind of nice to know in general that VirusTotal's antivirus engines match up with the actual engines, in this case, Microsoft Defender, and it took care of it. Now, the same thing happens, even though the other one was slightly different, that one that was slightly different code but developed around the same time. So even though it's slightly different, the same thing happens. It detects it as a different thing, a different signature, just like we saw in the engine, and then it eventually gets rid of it. But if we take a look at now what happens with the public release, now the only things changed in the public release, keep in mind, are the note no longer has a Tor address in it, and it also had some domains removed where I changed the domain that it responded to. And other than that, all the function names, all the other strings are exactly the same, including the functionality. So I wanted to say that because now we see it doesn't get detected whatsoever with an active antivirus set, but from 2021. Now, of course, this was created after that, but not much was changed. Like a lot of the binary was exactly the same, but of course the hash changed. So it tells us that antivirus really heavily depends on those hashes. And then it very heavily depends on really, really specific things like Tor addresses and stuff like that. Otherwise, it's completely evaded, which I think is just not really setting the bar high enough for malware authors. Now, what do we do about this? Well, maybe, just maybe, if I copy this into the C drive, and I'm doing this because when it runs, it actually encrypts the user folder. That's its job. It doesn't encrypt the entire computer. That makes sense, right? Because if I am a ransomware author, I don't want to disable your computer. That's not the purpose of this particular malware. I want it to still be working so I can get ransom from you. But let's go test this, because maybe, just maybe, it didn't detect it just kind of on file on disk, but it will detect it if the binary tries to execute in memory. So first things first, let's try to execute it. And you'll notice this here saying that the index is out of range. So depending on how it's coded, this particular error, unhandled because of sloppy coding as malware authors do, this particular error, one, messes with you a little bit, tells you that I'm Ironcat and you're not. So that's nice of the malware to just kind of play with you a little bit while you're trying to do some reversing. But the other thing is because I use parameters. Now this stops antivirus engines from being able to run them in sandboxes unless they know what those parameters are. And so it stops all of the IOCs or indicators of compromise or specific TTPs that this malware would do from being discovered in those situations. It's only used in the exact situation that the author wants it to be used in, ideally. So if I add in, and I'll let you know also, it's not just that there needs to be 2 arguments or parameters afterwards, it's that they have to be the correct thing. So the key here is war machine rocks, and this is the same thing for the public version. And if I now try to run this, we get another error. What's this about? Well, if you take a look, we also see that there's the HTTP message here. Now this HTTP message is the function that's trying to send a HTTP message out to the internet. Another antivirus evasion technique is to check to see if there's an internet connection. This one auto fails if there's not one, and so it won't run. Again, so that it can't be used in sandboxes that don't allow an internet connection. So I'm going to quickly enable the network on this VM and get us going here. And now when I run this, sure enough, it starts ripping through and encrypting everything. You'll notice that that alert was not an alert for antivirus, but instead it's getting an IO stack up because it's writing files so quickly to the file system that it's getting a bit of a backup. Now, the main thing I think is interesting about this is pretty common ransomware behavior. Now, it's also other kind of files behavior, so a bit hard to block, but something should be coming up saying this unsigned binary is rapidly changing files, but nothing does. And that's the thing that's kind of concerning, another bar that needs to be raised for antivirus. And when we take a look at our desktop, sure enough, no more desktop picture. It's encrypted. We get a ransom note, one with more stuff that messes with you, something that kind of looks like a key, so that kind of makes sense. And these executable that we left on the desktop is actually encrypted now. Now, let's go take a look at some of these files. Not that one. Let's go look at links. There's always good stuff. And you can see the encrypted extension. And then Windows, of course, reads it as an encrypted file type, this is just added when those files are modified. So those are all now encrypted and unreadable. Now, why do we do this? Again, I do this so that you can test your defenses. And I want to, one, humanize the threat. So I want everybody to understand the malware authors are just people and that the things that they do are not incredibly advanced, but just something that they can change or do very quickly to continue doing what they do. So if we make the cost of them very high by creating good behavioral detections, then they're less likely to want to go do all of that work or even really know what to do to be able to evade those detections. But we're just not there yet. And so that's the other component of this, is what I hope to do is kind of say, as we advance and kind of get into this and update those antivirus signatures, and you're seeing that there's still really easy ways to evade things that are not quite as advanced as you would hope they would be, hey, maybe now we can get to some of these organizations and make sure that we're either raising the bar with antivirus and or we are encouraging everyone to put in defenses and people and processes and technologies that go beyond antivirus to detect this kind of stuff. So this is something that you can even get down to granular TTPs, and that's inside the repo as well, to test very specific stuff, like maybe not full encryption and the message and all that stuff. Maybe you just want to see a registry key modified inside a binary and see if your people detect it. It's a great way to do some red teaming. So I hope you join me next time for advancing this to the next step. And if you're curious about any of this stuff in much more depth, I have a ton of content on Pluralsight as well. And I look forward to seeing you. Happy hunting.